So I really think that there's no better way to kick off the conference than today's session. We're going to be bringing together the leaders from the 4 organisations that make up Australia's accreditation and conformance infrastructure. And we're going to lift the lid on what they do and how they work together to keep Australians safe and prosperous every single day. I'm just going to give a tiny bit of context on each of our panellists before we get into it. So on my right here, we have Jennifer Evans, CEO of NATA. Jennifer has been with NATA for over 35 years and has taken on the responsibility of CEO in 2011. And since then, she's overseen a number of organisational developments, including in the areas of accreditation service delivery, ICT, stakeholder engagement, and most recently, NATA's communication and messaging. And I mean, look at this amazing conference that is happening right now. Next, we have Kareen Riley-Takos, who is COO at Standards Australia. And since joining Standards Australia in 2009, Kareen has held a variety of leadership roles across the organisation and specialising in standards development and content delivery. And next we have Dr. Bruce Warrington, Australia's Chief Metrologist and CEO of NMI. Bruce has a background in atomic physics research and has been with NMI since it formed in 2004. And finally, we have Alan Cook, who has joined JASANZ as CEO in 2023 after a successful career in the Royal Australian Air Force and the civil aviation industry in Australia and New Zealand. I would really like to also welcome you to submit any questions that you have to the panel via the Events Air app. We're going to endeavour to answer as many of those as we can. And shall we get into it? My first question is for everyone on the panel. It is, in just a couple of sentences, what does your organisation do? And if we think about an everyday activity, for example, going into the kitchen to grab breakfast, how would your organisation be involved in that? What would be the role? Perhaps let's start with Alan and then move along the panel.
No worries, thank you. We're at the outside of, you might think, of what happens on the breakfast table. JASANZ is there to bring together the trade between New Zealand and Australia initially, formed in '91 by a government treaty between the two countries. So our role is to get international accreditation of the various people who do the certification and the inspecting and the assessing of products and services. So we get that accreditation, improve the trade of products so we can get more in and out from New Zealand and Australia. We don't do inspection, we don't do certification, we don't do set standards, but we do set the criteria on which those standards are assessed.
Thanks, Maddie, and thanks, Alan. So part of that hidden safety net underneath breakfast is measurement, and we don't really think about it, but we're relying on measurement for a whole bunch of different parts, so that the food is safe to eat, that the water is safe to drink, that the electricity grid that supplies the kettle works properly, and all of that rests on measurements being right. And our job as the National Measurement Institute is to help those measurements be right. So we work in the laboratory to develop the reference standards and top-level measurements. We work with government, we work with industry as they bring food and new products to market. And we work with accredited labs to make sure that the measurements that are hidden in that everyday occurrence are right and can be trusted.
Great, thank you, Maddie. So to put it simply, what we do is that we develop standards that aim to ensure that products, services, and systems are safe, they perform reliably, and they're consistent. And I think, Bruce, to your point before around the breakfast table, so as soon as you walk in your kitchen, there's so many examples of standards everywhere, whether it's the safety of your electrical appliances, whether it's the energy efficiency labeling in your fridge and your dishwasher, but also the glass of water that you're going to get in the morning from the tap. It's all plumbing standards and a range of others that actually are keeping us safe. So the role of standards really is to bring industry, government, academia, regulators, and all of these organisations across the table so we can actually put those requirements in place.
Perhaps if I start with a bit of a definition of accreditation, which is to identify and to formally recognise competent conformity assessment bodies, and that might be testing laboratories, that might be inspection bodies, it might be certification bodies. So that's what accreditation is. So that's what NATA does. And we confine our work to specific conformity assessment bodies, namely testing laboratories, inspection bodies, and so on. So once they are identified as being competent to do the work that they do, they comply with the relevant international standard, for example, and through a demonstration of their capability, they are deemed competent. We formally recognise them by granting them NATA accreditation. I think to your question about the breakfast scenario, I think you can see from Bruce and from Kareen, there is just so much standards and conformance around the breakfast, in the breakfast scenario. It's almost too big a question. So perhaps to confine the answer, perhaps to just going to the tap to get one of your 8 glasses of water a day that we are all allegedly drinking. I'll just go with that. So Kareen mentioned the plumbing products. The plumbing products are tested. They're tested as part of the watermark scheme, which is under Alan's purview. They're tested, for example, for lead levels to make sure they're safe. The water meter that ticks over when you turn your tap on, that meter has to be approved for use. That meter has to be calibrated. That's under Bruce's purview, but we accredit the NMI for those activities. The reservoir that's supplying the water through your pipes and through your tap, they're tested regularly. They're tested using Australian standard test methods for compliance with regulatory requirements. They're tested in NATA accredited laboratories. So you can see that just in going to the tap to get a glass of water, just in those very simplistic, I suppose, examples, there's accreditation. And you can stretch that out to your breakfast scenario, to getting your food, to cooking your eggs and bacon, to going to your refrigerator, perhaps to checking the time, Bruce. Just had to mention that for Bruce.
So breakfast is really a lot more complicated than we thought.
It's absolutely more complicated.
My head is almost exploding the next time I go to get breakfast.
Exactly. And you think of, that's just breakfast.
Yes.
You know, everything you do in your day is underpinned by the work that we do and our colleagues do. So.
Absolutely. And you used a great word, underpin, and it brings me back to something we were talking about earlier, which is the fact that your organisations are often referred to as the hidden safety net. So maybe if I can throw to Bruce, why do you think that you are called Australia's hidden safety net, and should you be hidden?
I think there's 2 parts of that for me. So the safety net is about helping to ensure the safety, that people can rely on that infrastructure without necessarily thinking about it. That's a critical part of each of the responsibilities of each of our organisations to contribute to that safety. The flip side of it is if everybody relies on it without thinking, then they don't necessarily see all the work that we put in to make sure that they can have that confidence. And we don't necessarily have to be super visible, but it helps, I think. It helps us do our jobs. It helps other people understand that reliance if we are just visible enough to know that they can have confidence.
Yeah, I really like that. And another thing that came up already is the importance of collaboration between each other, right? Like, it doesn't work unless you all work together. Alan, could you perhaps expand upon that a little bit about how these organisations collaborate across Australia and New Zealand?
And New Zealand. Absolutely. We all have different areas that we focus on, but there are others that we share roles and share responsibilities. The watermark system is a good one. It has standards in there that obviously are put together. Mm-hmm. It has a scheme in there that we accredit people to assess against. So we're all little bits of the puzzle bringing together to help each other get that system through. None of us has an end-to-end role, and we each have a little bit in that jigsaw.
Absolutely. And Kareen, did you want to add something to that as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's incredible. I was actually yesterday just looking at the collaboration and the input that those organizations actually have in the standards development process. And it is really important. Part of the way that we go about developing standards is that we ensure that all stakeholders that are impacted by it need to be involved. But obviously those organizations there, NMI, in the case of NMI, are providing inputs into the standard. In the case of NATA and JASANZ, they're providing their inputs as well as to how those standards are going to be applied. It's super important, and we have a great collaboration from that technical perspective that it's so fundamental to the technical infrastructure in this country.
Absolutely. And I guess expanding a little bit further internationally, what about international collaboration? Did anyone want to take that, perhaps Jennifer?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I can speak from NATA's perspective, but there are parallels, certainly, I'm sure, that we can all speak to. NATA is a member of the International Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation. There is also an Asia-Pacific equivalent, so we are a member there. So we collaborate with accreditation bodies at the global level and through the Asia-Pacific. And in fact, one of my predecessor CEOs was instrumental in setting up both of those organisations. So NATA absolutely punches above its weight. Australia punches above its weight at the global level. So we collaborate with our colleagues internationally in those forums. We also collaborate with our colleagues in less formal ways. We, for example, will collaborate one-to-one with other accreditation bodies on specific projects. We are currently collaborating with the United Kingdom's accreditation service on a particular project, for example. And of course, we have a very special relationship with our colleagues in New Zealand, our counterpart organisation IANZ. That is recognised specifically in our MOU with the Commonwealth Government as being a special relationship to underpin the Australian Government and the New Zealand Government's Trans-Tasman relationship and Trans-Tasman objectives. So at the international level, we're collaborating. If you go one above that, those international organisations also collaborate. So I mentioned ILAC. ILAC itself collaborates with the international organisations that Kareen, that Standards Australia belongs to, that Bruce NMI's organisation belongs to. So they collaborate at a global level. There's an organisation that has been established a few years ago called INETQI, the International Network of Quality Infrastructure. And that includes these global organisations that our organisations are a part, but also, importantly, organisations like UNIDO, organisations like the World Bank and the WTO. So the importance of the work that we do is recognised at a global level and recognised in formal ways through collaborations with, as I said, with the WTO, with UNIDO, with the World Bank. The importance of standards and conformance just can't be underestimated,
Absolutely.
Both for domestic purposes and for international relationships and trade in particular.
Sorry, Kareen, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I think this is the key point here. It's really ensuring that we have, all of the infrastructure in place to ensure safe, reliable trade amongst economies. So Standards Australia is a member of two international organisations, the International Electrotechnical Commission and also the International Organisation for Standardisation, ISO. And as you said, we also recognise for punching above our weight. We put a lot of effort into it, and our industry and stakeholders put a lot of effort into ensuring that Australia's voice is heard on the international arena. And whatever we're adopting of international standards, they're going to be fit for purpose for our country. But this point is really important because we work really hard as part of our obligations under the World Trade Organization that we are not going to be creating technical barriers to trade for no reason. Sometimes there's specific reasons where we may need to have different standards in Australia, but quite often, we absolutely look towards international standards to ensure this trade is enabled in a safe manner.
Perhaps I should also mention, just as part of, to support Kareen, when Standards Australia are representing Australia at ISO or IEC, if that work relates to accreditation, it will be NATA that provides the representative, or it might be JASANZ that provides the representative on behalf of Standards Australia. So there's collaboration domestically to get the best representation to enable Standards Australia to represent Australia at the global level. So there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes to get the right representation.
And Alan, I saw you might have a thought there as well.
Yeah, it's one of the key elements of JASANZ is we are, one of our objectives is to be an international citizen, both for Australia and New Zealand, both between the countries and internationally. And all those committees that Jennifer says we're on, we're part of, or the associations. The other thing we have is an international workforce. JASANZ is actually represented around the world in that we accredit overseas organisations as well, not just New Zealand, predominantly for trade, inwards and outwards, but we collaborate internationally with other accreditation forums as well as countries around the world. So it's not just in the two, Australia and New Zealand, but internationally represented. And we actually, between all of us, we're well represented, chairing committees, technical committees around the world, and the two countries do really bat above their weight, and we influence a lot.
Yeah.
So Australia is a small country, but we're batting above our weight, not just in the
Absolutely.
swimming, we're doing more. I love
Not just
that.
swimming, not just Olympics.
wonderful.
You know, as I said, one of my predecessor CEOs was actually instrumental in setting up the international organisations of which NATA is a part. And since that time, the representation of NATA as chairs of those international organisations, I'm the current chair of APAC, for example. We have chairs of working groups, we have chairs of technical committees, and we participate. And I should perhaps acknowledge, thanks to the Australian government for providing us with some funding to participate, but nevertheless, we participate well above our weight in those global activities to make sure that we not only are contemporary and current and up to date, but also to keep a check on some of the perhaps unusual approaches that can be taken at the global level that might not be fit for purpose for Australia. So it's not just about us sort of having an overseas trip. It is about serving Australia's interest and making sure things don't go left of centre that won't be fit for purpose for Australia.
So Bruce, would you say it's about sort of advocating for Australia on the global stage in these situations?
It is. It's also about that kind of recognition of Australian capability that others have talked about. In the measurement world, that's fundamental to trade. So when we put a tonne of wheat on a boat, it's got to come off as a tonne. It's got to make sure our trading partners rely on the safety, the protein content, the GMO character of that. All of the measurements that underpin that have to be recognised internationally, and there's a global system of comparisons that have to trust Australian measurements. Accreditation is part of that recognition. It's also making sure that the measurement standards and techniques that are adopted internationally reflect what's needed in this country, the way that others have articulated. So a measurement instrument like a balance or a petrol pump has to work in a European temperature range, but it also has to work in an Australian temperature range.
Okay, that's a really great example. I feel like it's sort of contextualised it a bit more. And just thinking about the future and how things are evolving over time, I'd like to open up a question to the whole panel, is how are your organisations and your collaboration models changing as Australia's needs also evolve?
I might go first on this one. I think, we're talking to an audience that I'm assuming, somewhat familiar, that there is this concept. Standards take a lot of time to develop. They're based on consensus. When you look at the international arena, it can take time to achieve consensus. And it's a challenge when we're looking at, critical and emerging technologies, and we're looking at such a fast pace of change around us. How do we keep up when we have such robust processes that require a lot of consultation and engagement? As an organisation, we're really trying to adapt to that, because we do believe that, if you have innovation that it's not underpinned by standards or agreed interoperability and other aspects, then you may end up having proprietary systems that are going off, and then we don't have that level of collaboration. But how do we enable that? And last year we released a new way of actually developing standards. They're still consensus-based, but it's a much more accelerated way of delivering that. I'm pleased to say that we had one last year that was published within 4 months. Woo-hoo-ha. It's a great feat for us. Doesn't happen very often. It took a lot of effort from industry and stakeholders in our organization as well to achieve that. And I think, Maddie, the other point that I'm really excited is that I think particularly with generative AI, I'm not suggesting in any way that we're going to have standards self-written or replacing humans, but I think as an aid, particularly around drafting and also the research and discovery of content, I think we're about to see a significant shift in our industries pushed by and enabled by some of the technology that's coming up.
Perhaps if I go next, because we're last in that continuum. Standards Australia, we need standards, we need measurement, we need conformity assessment, then we need accreditation. So we are last in the continuum. So when you are talking about change, we are always at the end, and we tend to get the blame for holding it up. We're slow to do X, Y, Z, but the reality is things take time. Standards take time to develop. Then we need measurement capability, then we need conformity assessment capability, and then we have accreditation. So we're acutely aware that we get the blame for the slowness of the standards and conformance infrastructure adapting to change. And our mission is absolutely to continue to review our internal processes to make sure we make as little contribution to that time frame as possible. For example, post-COVID, we've been able to leverage off the increased use of new technologies to do virtual assessments, for example. Rather than going on site, in some circumstances, we're able to do them using Teams or cameras or so forth.
That's really interesting, actually. Can I ask a little bit more about that? So with the COVID pandemic, have you found that there have been some changes that have been accelerated or new developments that have come a little bit faster through that?
I think certainly from accreditation, it gives you, it's not that these technologies were not available prior to COVID, but I think we all became familiar and much more adept at using them and appreciated the value of them. Now, I'm not saying that in all circumstances we can replace on-site assessments. That's not what I'm saying. But it gives us an additional tool that we can use in selected circumstances, for example, to augment our processes and perhaps to accelerate those processes. So that's just one example of how we can improve our turnaround and our timeliness. So we're not contributing to the whole time frame of that continuum in supporting the implementation of new technologies.
And just one follow-up question. This is for Alan. So you talked about the continuum with accreditation being last. Where does JASANZ fit into that picture?
Our future that we're trying to really concentrate on and where we fit in there is to get more relevance up front, particularly with governments. If you want to establish trade, get conformance and accreditation in early and start thinking about the importance of that for gaining access and gaining products, services in and out of the country. Think about us at the beginning, not at the end, when we're trying to implement things at last minute and holding it up, which is not what we're about. But internationally, we want to be seen to, key point for us is to be seen to be involvement in free trade agreements, getting conformance in there, getting accreditation in there, so that we can get a lot more access in and out of the country. Back to your breakfast cereal, so you can choose different ones from all around the world. Also, to make it easier just to get things across the border, just by getting in earlier and getting greater acceptance around the world. So a more international relevance and more early relevance with government thinking and government policy making.
Can I add a couple of things there? I think for us, measurement technology, measurement science changes really rapidly. That's more visible, maybe. Yes. Our job is to stay on the leading edge of that curve to make sure Australia can take advantage of those new technologies. But I think also a challenge for all of our organisations is adding value to trade in particular. So we each have a relatively traditional role in supporting trade, measuring the amount of wheat or preparing the standard by which it's tested. But increasingly, the technologies allow us to add value to that trade through particularly digital means. So the whole history of that transaction can be supported digitally with information about its conformance or the standards or its measurements or how they were accredited. And that's part of our taking advantage of new technology.
Absolutely. I might just take this opportunity now to encourage anyone in the audience, if you do have questions, to submit them via the Events app. So you usually won't have these 4 people up here all together ready to answer your questions. So just make sure. But I'm also really excited that there'll be more sessions where we'll pick up on all of these topics, throughout the 2 days. I guess there's one topic that we touched on, which is AI. Does anyone have anything more to add about how AI might be shaping or influencing your organisation's work?
So at STANZ Australia, we have, in the last couple of years, trying to really understand a lot more how people are engaging with our content and helping end users navigate it. It's quite often quite dense technical content. We're not suggesting that we need to oversimplify because some of the subjects are quite complex. But we have found that in many instances, our end users just, are really struggling with getting 300, 400 pages of standards to digest, whether you're a tradie and you're an electrician and English might be your second language, you might have left school in year 10. So how do we actually allow and help people engage with the content in a safe way? And we have a pilot underway, which is kind of finding and helping people find the right information in a much simpler way than it is done today. So we're working through that. We're also piloting, assisting on the content development itself. And where I would like to see AI moving along, or, we have these initiatives happening on the international arena around smart standards, which is, content that is going to be machine interpretable, machine actionable, so that therefore you would be able to actually kind of potentially remove the human interaction in some of the standards that are being put forward. I think we're still a little bit far from that. AI has its downsides as well in terms of, particularly with the kind of searching and the chatbots, that it's very hard to ensure that every answer is going to be correct. And we deal with risk and we deal with certainty in what we're trying to provide people, but I think it can certainly help, and that's where we're navigating towards.
Definitely. Did anyone else have anything to add there?
I think it's that point about trust, which is critical. So if our role is to support trust in those standards and conformance structures, how can we take advantage of AI to be efficient, to do more, but to preserve that key trust? I think for us in particular, we are at a relatively early stage in that exploration, but I think those digital elements are part of the pathway. The more we can write that knowledge that underpins the trust digitally, the more we can automate some of those key steps to accelerate the process.
I would endorse Bruce's comments. I think we're probably at the same stage. We're looking at, trust is absolutely imperative. Technical capability is the mantra, and we can't compromise on that. But what can we do using AI perhaps to automate more routine procedures, to expedite processes, to improve our turnaround times, et cetera, without compromising trust, without compromising the technical rigour of the process. So I think we're at early stages, talk of piloting this and piloting that, but very, very early stages, because we can't, if we lose trust of our accredited facilities and of our stakeholders, then that's the end of NATA accreditation. So we do have to take that fairly slowly, and mindful of the downsides of AI, the biases, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely. Yeah, trust is so important, right? And I think that's something that's come out a lot in this discussion. It's the balance between trust and taking advantage of these new opportunities and these new technologies. And I think I would love to return to a question that we spoke about before, which is about this hidden safety net concept. You know, I guess maybe I'll throw to Alan here about that hidden safety net, which Australians trust but also don't know necessarily so much about. What do you think could be the benefits of increased public awareness of this safety net?
Well, it gives more trust at the end of the day, the big word we're using. At the moment, we work as a quiet achiever. We do everything. People assume that you're going to everything you consume or you use or you buy is going to be okay. But if we actually get up there for industry, you know, is it a competitive advantage to have that, to actually demonstrate that this is a better product, a guarantee to do what it says it is, or it is what it says it is. So I think that, getting out there and selling that this organisation that we have actually makes life a little bit safer for a consumer.
Absolutely.
I think also, so we work with a bunch of different stakeholders who need measurement in different ways, and some of those we've worked with for a long time. The more visible we are, the more that capability can be used. So the more others who would benefit from the same capabilities know to talk to us about an issue, or can ask, I've got this problem, can measurement help? So a lot of people don't even know that they can ask that question, and so visibility is a part of maximising the impact.
Yeah. Oh.
Perhaps Kareen, Jennifer?
Well, you know, exactly to Bruce's point, and I think to a point that Alan made earlier, if we are more visible, if more people know who we are and what we do, then whether it's government, whether it's business, whether it's industry, policymakers in general can engage with us earlier in the process. We can provide them with advice on how standards and conformance can support whatever their policy is. And that doesn't have to be a regulation. That can be codes of practice, that can be all sorts of policy across the board. If consumers know that we exist, that consumers understand, at least have an understanding of what we do, they can agitate for us. They can be our best advocates in demanding, well, is there a standard for this? Well, is there proper testing? Is there proper measurement? And is it accredited? So if more people know about us, then we're going to be more useful, we're going to be more relevant, we're going to be better at providing the services that we provide.
Absolutely.
So I think, you know, for as long as I've worked at NATA, we've pretty much been happy staying under the radar. You know, oh, we don't want to put our head above the parapet because you know what happens, it gets shot off and you get blamed for every single testing failure known to humankind. But we've actually flipped that, and for these reasons, we're now becoming much more visible, we're being much more proactive about saying we are of value to this country at all sorts of levels in order for consumers to be advocating for us and for policymakers to think of us when they're developing policy. Think of us first, as Alan said.
Absolutely, yes. And I'm sorry, Kareen, did you have one more thing to add?
I was just going to add, I mean, I completely agree with this piece around the visibility, but I actually think that as organisations, and maybe I should just speak on behalf of Stands Australia, I think we have been really bad at telling the story because we tend to tell it from the inside of how we do it as opposed to what is the impact and what is the outcome of what we do. We're very excited about changing that, you know, the storytelling so that people actually understand the impact because quite frankly, you know, for the general public, they probably don't really care that, you know, we have constituted technical committees that representative of various organisations. Like, it doesn't really matter, but it's the impact that standard is going to have in keeping them safe or on their daily lives to ensure that, you know, things are connected.
We're not offended.
We've been the same. I think there's a lot of work for all of us to do in telling a better story.
Here,
exactly.
That's right.
Yeah, but I really like that because, I mean, working at the ABC, storytelling is central to everything we do. And we do talk a lot about organisations that are doing really special things, and the way that people learn about that and see that as really important is through story. So I think that's a really exciting thing that's happening. We've got some really fantastic questions from the audience, so I might throw one to the panel right now. The first one is about nuclear energy. So the debate around nuclear energy is very topical right now, given the public's concern over consumer safety. What would your organisations do? What role would they play?
Everybody's looking at me.
No.
I think
One for Bruce.
I think, so obviously any energy infrastructure has a whole lot of measurements to make sure it's operating safely and efficiently. And they're kind of really visible when we think about a nuclear power plant. In this particular case, we would be working closely with other parts of Australia's measurement system, ANSTO, the Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation, ARPANSA, who do radiation safety, to make sure that those measurements which underpin safety and efficiency are trusted. I guess the main point I would make is that that requirement for measurements for trust exists for any energy infrastructure. So we have all of those requirements today for electricity, for gas, for hydrogen, so they're kind of more visible for a nuclear option, but it's part of our job all day, every day.
And I think from our perspective, really, there are many nations that are using nuclear energy. I don't know in depth the details, but the International Electrotechnical Commission does have technical committees that deal with nuclear energy, as we would in any new area that Australia would be getting involved. The first thing that we do is look internationally. Has anyone done it? Is anyone doing it in a good way? Does it make sense for Australia to look at those standards and adopt them? And if there are specific needs that we would need to kind of convene technical committees to develop, specific Australian standards, that's something that we would do. But we're always looking at, is there something tried and tested internationally that we can leverage from our networks and participate internationally?
And further to Bruce's point, he mentioned there is now the need for measurement and testing, and therefore competent testing laboratories, inspection bodies and so forth in any energy system. There's infrastructure, there's the actual energy source itself. So on the back of Bruce's comments about measurement and testing, you have accredited facilities doing that to provide the trust and the assurance that it's being done properly.
I see. Thank you very much. And another question, which I really like, is about how people in Australia can become more involved in your organisations. I'll just leave that one open to whoever would like to take that.
I'm happy to go. We're always looking for experts to join our technical committees, and I'll use the opportunity as well for a plug for our Next Gen program. We have a fantastic program where we're getting the next generation of experts to participate, to get involved. There is a great value that you're supporting the technical infrastructure in this country, but also for participants themselves. I'd suggest reaching out to our organisation, and we would love to put you in contact with one of our project managers for a technical committee.
Yep. We're always looking for technical experts. It's quite a challenge, very small organisation. You don't have one person does everything. So we contract out a lot of our work to technical experts. So we're always looking for that. We also run a whole lot of training and opportunity. Our Futures program is all about getting people to understand what is conformance, what is accreditation, and hopefully identifying future members of our community from that, for getting people on board. But yeah, definitely contractors, because experts are hard to come by in certain fields.
Same.
Absolutely. And we're running out of time, so we've just got time for another couple of questions. I've got a really interesting one here, which is sort of related to nuclear energy. What role do you see for standardisation in helping laboratories and industries reduce their carbon footprint and align with global net zero targets? I'll leave that to anyone.
Look, I think there is a really big role in standardisation in driving those outcomes. I think the challenge and where we sit sometimes in some of these kind of big topical and controversial debates is that, again, we operate on the basis of consensus. And if you have large portions of stakeholders that may not necessarily want to advance that, sometimes the standards process is not the right avenue. We would love it to be if there is alignment and a significant public policy drive across all sectors of the economy. we're there to facilitate the technical aspects. How do you measure? How do you ensure that you can have, services and products that are going to be produced and kind of with a sustainability focus? But again, sometimes when it's potentially a controversial aspect and you cannot reach consensus, it becomes quite challenging in our environment to actually progress some of that debate.
I think this is a really big challenge for all of our organisations. If you think about international trade, the same way people have to trust our ability to measure quantity or quality and have that accredited and trusted, people will have to trust the carbon content of our trade. And we will have to develop ways of giving that trust the same way we do at the moment. That's a big problem for all of the world. To really measure and therefore to control and optimise our emissions footprint. So there's a standard kind of quote in our world that if you can't measure it, you can't control it, you can't manage it.
Excellent. And one last question, which is on the future theme. I'd like to ask each of you in just a couple of sentences to tell me about something that you're excited about, perhaps a big change that's coming in your field. Shall we start with Alan and move across?
I'm going to go back to AI. It makes our life easier, internally and externally. So we're really trying to understand what it means for us. So we see that as digitising our workforce, digitising our work environment, making life easier for us to do our work as being our future, particularly internationally. Yeah.
Can I give you a geeky science answer?
Please do.
So it goes back to my background, which is in atomic clocks. So there's an international system of measurement. We all use the metric system. And at various different points through history, we've taken an international decision to make those standards better. There was a big one in 2018 that we got to be part of. The next one on the horizon is about redefining the second, about defining the way we measure time differently with a different kind of atomic clock. And it doesn't sound like it means a lot. It sounds a very abstract thing, but most accurate time underpins everything from navigation to high-speed trading on financial networks to security on computer networks. So every time there's an advance in our ability to measure time, then society changes. And that's what I'm excited about.
And Kareen?
You took my thought process first. That was really good. Look, I think from my perspective is quite simple. I think we're living in a time where there is such unprecedented change that trust is super important, and I think that's the role that we'll continue to play. But what I'm most excited about is being able to simplify a complex system, and I think that's something that we're all moving towards. I think events such as these are a great opportunity to actually talk about the outcomes a lot more, and also, underpinned by technology and also understanding end users and what are their needs and how do we actually drive that in a much more consistent way.
Excellent. And Jennifer?
Yeah, look, I'm excited, and I'm going to steal the thunder of my colleague Brett Hyland, who's going to give a presentation tomorrow with Kim Layton from JASANZ on a mechanism, an international mechanism that underpins the delivery of digitally accessible conformity assessment information. Now that sounds a bit abstract, I suppose, but what this does, it makes test reports, inspection reports, certifications, certificates, accreditation information available to end users digitally and importantly from a trusted source. So no longer relying on pieces of paper coming from the source through a supply chain, through many, many hands to an end user who gets something that's unintelligible and possibly doesn't even bear relationship with the original product. So Brett, JASANZ, a partnership with GS1, we're working on a particularly exciting project. This is going to support supply chains. It's going to make product conformity data verifiable and make it more trusted and certainly support claims that might be around sustainability claims, it might be around just product conformance claims. So I'm really excited about the work Brett does, and just a shout out to Brett and to Kim and to GS1, and please come to Brett's presentation tomorrow.